Coming up, tribal leaders are speaking up about federal Indian boarding schools, including the chief of the Shawnee Nation. What challenges face Native in recovery? And Mary Nett Pember joins us from the road. I'm Mark Trahant, filling in for Leah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Leah Chavez.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. Leah Chavez is away. We start in Washington, D.C., where a group of federal lawmakers heard from boarding school survivors last week. New legislation introduced by Sharice Davids will establish a TruthHealing Commission on federal Indian boarding schools. Davids testified before the House Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples. This formal body will investigate, document, and acknowledge past injustices of the federal government's Indian boarding school policies. This include attempts to terminate Native cultures, religions, and languages, assimilation practices, and human rights violations. During Representative Davids' testimony, she shared how much of this part of America's dark past has impacted Native America.
I would not be here today were it not for the resilience of my ancestors and those who came before me. The policies and assimilation practices of the United States had the sole purpose of culturally assimilating American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children in residential boarding schools across the country.
The commission will also develop recommendations for Congress to aid in the healing of Native communities, historical and intergenerational trauma. A new report released by the U.S. Congress last week explores persistent structural barriers in Indigenous communities. The Joint Economic Committee released the report. It includes members of the U.S. Senate and House. The report examines how economic opportunities are limited for Native Americans. Randall Aki is one of the authors of the report.
I think this report, what it does is it puts a lot of the socioeconomic conditions of Native Americans, Alaska Natives, American Indians in perspective, and it really does a great job of summarizing a number of different outcomes, a number of different domains, and puts it into a language that's digestible and understandable for a broad swath of the population, so that it's not caught up in jargon.
The report details barriers in health, education, getting jobs, and other disparities in the labor market. And it also found that Native American households and businesses struggle to assess credit and financing on equal terms. This hinders the growth of these enterprises as well as the creation of household wealth. Representative Sharice Davids stated the report is helping expose areas of Indigenous self-determination that needed added definition. Voters from North Carolina will head to the polls on Tuesday for primary election day. There are 2 Indigenous candidates on the ballot hoping to make history. ICT's Polly Dennett-Claw reports.
I'm Crystal Cavalier, and I'm running for Congress.
Crystal Cavalier was born and raised in North Carolina. She's a citizen of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi and says she has always fought for the civil rights of her community. At just 15, Cavalier sued the Alamance County School District for not letting her join the National Honor Society. She won that case.
And that's what we really need, is for people to stand up for civil rights.
This experience is part of the reason she is running for Congress. The longtime environmental advocate is running as a Democrat to represent the state's 4th congressional district. This area includes the city of Durham and Chapel Hill. Cavalier is running against 7 others for the party's nomination.
One of the things I've been doing is fighting a pipeline that has been trying to come through our backyard. So the Mountain Valley Pipeline, Southgate Extension, is coming through North Carolina. and it is going through a Black and Indigenous community. So my community, it's about 6 miles from where we live.
Cavalier isn't the only Indigenous person running for Congress in the Tar Heel state. Charles Graham is the only Indigenous representative in the state's legislature. He is running for Congress as a Democrat too, but in another district, in District 7.
I'm a candidate I think would be the right person at the right time, in the right district.
Graham was an educator for 3 decades. He told ICT his goal was to make sure students get the education they deserve.
Education is mighty important.
The Lumbee tribe of North Carolina is the largest tribal nation east of the Mississippi. Their citizens live across 4 counties, including Robeson, Cumberland, Hokie, and Scotland. All of them are located in the southern part of the state. Congressional District 7 has Cumberland and Robeson County, meaning a Lumbee citizen could be representing Lumbee communities in Congress. Already, Graham has represented his tribal community in state politics for over a decade.
I think I would be ready on day one. I have the experience working in a legislative body.
In Gallup, New Mexico, Polly Denetclaw for ICT News.
The candidates who win the primary election will move forward to the general election in November. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, tribal leaders react to an Interior's boarding school report, and we'll talk more about boarding schools in South Dakota. But first, option of Indigenous people in recovery? Stay with us. According to the Indian Health Service, Indigenous people are more likely to report alcohol and substance abuse disorders than any other race. Some of the reasons include historical trauma, poverty, racism, and low levels of education. But even with these challenges, rehab centers like Native American Connections, based in Phoenix, are using Indigenous practices to fight this disease. We are joined now by Sonia Brooks, who has been a counselor for more than 7 years at the center. Welcome, Sonia.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Let's get right into it. What makes your rehab center different from other treatment centers?
Well, here at Native American Connections, we offer spiritually based services at 2 of our centers. First, Patina Mountain Preserve has our male-only center, and our Patina Wellness Center provides services to women, but we also provide services to couples who want to recover together, and also to women and couples who have dependent children. We also use Indigenous-based practices such as sweat lodge, talking circle, smudging in the mornings, red road wellbriety. Those are our main core values and our core curriculum and our programs.
One of the challenges with any program is when someone decides it's time is to actually get into that program. How does that work with Native American Connections?
Well, we do offer access, which is our state-funded insurance here, but we also contract with many different tribes, including Alaska too. We have a few contracts with them. And so in order to get there, usually we try to contract with the tribe or use a state insurance, or even, you could just call us up and we'll work with you any way that we can.
I'm intrigued by the idea of a couple going in together. How does that work?
Well, when you call us up and you ask for you guys to come in together, we'll schedule a time for admission. And that admission will assign both a counselor and a case manager to each individual, but it will also do family services such as like family counseling. And we'll discuss those unique barriers that can happen in recovery when 2 people come together, but also the successes too. So I think that that's one of the beautiful things that we offer in our program. And it's one of those things that I really enjoy too.
Well, and there's so many challenges. You think of the impact on children. Do they become part of that process as well?
So if we have dependent children on our site, they do become part of the process because during the day, the adult, whoever their caretaker is, and they do regular groups. And then by the end of the day, they reunite with their kids. And so we do have a child care provider on site. And so they also work with the kid individually and pretty much help them learn that mom or dad is in recovery, and they do their best to help the child reach those milestones too, while the parent is in recovery. and working through those groups individually with counseling and so forth.
You think about the long arc of this situation and problem and the challenges. Does it feel like you're making progress?
It really does, actually. I think one of the biggest things that really help us here is our sense of community and also our cultural and spiritual identity. And so the community part, we really do encourage our clients to work together and to realize that they are a little family when they're on site, that it takes a village to help each other get sober and stay sober, whereas also helping them connect back to Creator and their higher power. That seems to be a major foundation that keeps people sober longer.
You think about just the last generation, how common it's been for both sobriety and even moderation to be a part of the conversation in ways that probably didn't exist 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah. And I think that a lot of people really don't think a lot about full sobriety or even sobriety for longer than last time. People think that they can just quit. But the reality is that most people, their recovery journey is a lifetime. And to go from that perspective and also looking at wellness over a lifetime, that in itself takes a lot of time to accept. But not only that, once you accept that, I think it really becomes a journey worth fighting for, a journey worth living, especially with Creator and all of the Indigenous practices that we do offer.
You mentioned wellness several times, and I wanted to come back to that because it's more than just substance abuse. It's actually living a life that brings you lots of joy. How does that become part of the conversation?
Well, I think what intimidates people when they come into residential treatment is they think that addiction is just, well, this is separate from family. This is separate from everything else. But in reality, wellness and sobriety is all around. It's the entire person that we're trying to treat. And it becomes a lifestyle. And so I think at that point, it really comes down to, being emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually in tune with yourself in order to really have long-term sobriety.
As someone who works in this field, I'm sure you have stories that just warm your heart and you think about that moment when things turned around. Maybe talk about that in general.
I see so many people coming in. They get services. They don't really know a lot about what's happening in their lives. And then they find that connection, that aha moment. And when they do that, they start to feel that Creator works in so many different ways for them. There's this moment of renewed sense of spirituality, identity, and knowing who they are for the first time. And that's what it did for me too, working here. Through my clients, I learned so much, and hopefully my clients learn a little bit from me too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah.
The House Subcommittee on Indigenous People held a hearing for a new piece of legislation last week. H.R. 5444 would establish a TruthHealing Commission on federal Indian boarding school policies and passed by Congress. Boarding school survivors and tribal leaders testified at the hearing, including Shawnee Chief Ben Barnes. Chief Barnes, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Why is this legislation so important for boarding school survivors?
Well, a couple of years ago, the Shawnee tribe found ourselves, we were having discussions around the Shawnee Indian Manual Labor School near Kansas City, Kansas. The city of Shawnee Mission, folks may be acquainted with that name, that those towns are actually now Shawnee and Mission, Kansas. And our mission actually resides inside of a 1 square mile postage stamp of a municipality, Fairway, Kansas. And as we started, unpacking various historical issues, restorations, it's a national landmark. There's some interpretation problems there. And whenever Kamloops happened in Saskatchewan, we realized that we had some experience that perhaps maybe we could share our experiences, that the dissonance and the confrontations we were having with trying to tell our story, that this had a national, this maybe could help inform and share our experience with other tribal nations and communities. So for us, we felt like there has to be truth and healing reconciliation like had been done in Canada before, because we just weren't finding the venue to be able to tell our children's story. And not just ours, obviously, all of the United States' boarding school stories.
So much of getting any kind of healing process underway requires answers to a lot of questions. How important is data to this story?
Well, for the Shawnee people, we're still looking for answers on what happened to our kids. In 1850, Secretary Cornatzer of the Shawnees writes Congress and says, we have dead kids. No one will tell us where they're buried. And still to this day, Congress has not answered us. We'd like to know what happened to our kids. We don't know what happened to them. Only 12 acres of the original 2,000 acres of that Indian manual labor school still exist. So, but for the tribes and communities and those that testified this past week before Congress, they need answers now, because some of the people that did this to them are still walking around, and different institutions some of those institutions are still open.
What's kind of the process for the next step? What was the reaction from folks in Congress when you testified?
You know, I was really surprised at, I don't want to say that our story is superficial, the Shawnee experience in boarding schools, but I didn't undergo what these witnesses did. The Shawnee story, I'm talking about it from almost I don't want to say an abstract, but the people that were there, those 4 witnesses that actually experienced the horrors, the terrible things that were perpetrated on them, and they were just children. Yeah, those I can't get rid of that. It's like an intrusive thought. This weekend I was eating breakfast when my grandson was there, and I kept looking at my grandson and thinking, he was their age, and so that was some of the reception. I think all of us felt the truth of those narratives. I know that our congressmen and women that were there, they felt that as well. This is bipartisan. This is not a Republican Democrat issue. This is a people issue. People that you cannot watch this and not be affected by it.
What's extraordinary about this moment is so many people feel as you do and get that sense of outrage and wanting answers. And yet there's also a part of the country, and I know you experience it in Oklahoma, that says, don't talk bad about the past, just let it be, move on. And you really can't move on until you get this reconciliation going. People
went to boarding schools all over the United States. Of course, the Shawnee traveled all over the United States. We have 20-some states that we occupied historically. And so whether it's the Shawnee Indian Manual Labor School in Kansas, White's in Indiana, or whether it's Chilocco or the Seneca Boarding School here in Northeast Oklahoma, we have people that, attended these places. My auntie attended one of these schools. And so, these are personal stories for all of us. I don't think anyone in Indian country has not been affected by boarding school in some way. Well, in fact, it's one of the few stories where we actually, like a lot of groups, publish trigger warnings, because we know that it's going to go impact people so deeply as they learn, revive these stories. Yeah, that was, I never really understood that, I think, walking around with a certain amount of privilege in this world, what a trigger warning might mean until, like I was telling you, sitting at breakfast and this intrusive thought just floods over me when somebody said something that reminded me of the testimony of Matthew Warbonnet or Jim LaBelle. And Truth and Reconciliation Commission could elevate this to a national conversation. What's the one thing you want people across the country to get from this? I don't think, none of us are there to point fingers and say, this is your fault. This is your fault. This is not what it's about. It's about truth, healing, and reconciliation. We have to be able to tell these stories. No one wants us to tell these stories. We have been told, the Shawnee tribe has been told, don't talk about dead kids because it hurts our fundraising efforts in our local nonprofits. Don't talk about this because this boarding school was also good. There was also good things that happened there. And so there's this moral relativism, this contextualization of the suffering of children. No, just no. People say that to us and they just got to stop. They've got to stop. We've got to be able to tell the full truth of our kids. This is a real and recent truth. Even if that recentness goes back to the Civil War before, we've endured this intergenerational trauma on our nations, and it's time to have truth, reconciliation, and full healing. Chief Barnes, thank you so much. Mary Annette Pember is a national correspondent for ICT. She's in South Dakota this week, investigating
investigating the boarding school story for a project she's working on. This is so interesting, Marionette. You've been working on this story literally for years, and now that it's front and center, you're still probing. Tell us what you're working on.
Yes, that is amazing. I have been writing about the boarding school issue for years, and I just want to say hi, Mark. Thanks for having me on. This is like really an exciting time, and I joke that I'm glad I lived long enough to see it. The world's attention is finally focused on the boarding school issue, as you know, with the location of the graves up in Canada, and so all of a sudden the world is awakening that to the fact that there is such a long history in this country. So I'm in South Dakota. Actually, we are focusing on Red Cloud School, which is on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Red Cloud School is a Catholic school, and it has been in existence in Pine Ridge, actually almost from the very beginning of the creation of the reservation. It started in 1887 when one Jesuit priest arrived here at the behest of Chief Red Cloud, who asked that the black robes come. And he was joined with 4 Franciscan nuns. When they arrived, interestingly, several Native folks met them. And they said, "Oh, welcome. We knew a black robe was coming." And they asked, when they saw the nuns, "Oh, are these your wives?" And he said, "No, they're not. They're holy women." So they have a very long history here. Initially as a boarding school, and I think it was in the 60s. I don't have the exact year. They discontinued boarding and have functioned since then as a day school. So the Catholics are really the only denomination that continues to operate schools. They do continue to operate a couple of boarding schools, but they're the only denomination that continues to operate schools with a focus on the Native community. So what I'm here to look at is just how the community is, how they are dealing, with this current controversy. And as you might expect, there's quite a diversity of opinion and feelings, and many of them are quite strong. Some folks will have shared with me that their experience at Red Cloud, even when it was a boarding school, was formative in a very positive way, and they attribute their success in life to their time at Red Cloud. And then some people have shared that it was a formative experience, but in a very negative way. It was really diminishing to their language and culture. And they often talk about the very kind of a strict punishment. Often there was corporal punishment. And of course, there was corporal punishment in the entire country in schools. But many people have complained that the corporal punishment here at Red Cloud was especially enthusiastic. So we have this great diversity of feeling and opinion, and people I thought it would be very interesting to find how they are navigating all of that.
It's so interesting because the United States, which has its founding document, the First Amendment, is basically parceled out boarding schools early on before the federal system started to not just the Catholics, but a number of sects. And that took over for government policy in a lot of ways for this assimilation that they tried.
Yes, I heard like a really interesting remark a few months ago during a webinar with not with the Catholics, but with another denomination. I think it was the Protestants. And one of their scholars mentioned, this notion of assimilation through education didn't just occur suddenly. It didn't just emerge during Grant's peace policy following the Civil War. That has been, but that was very much drove, I think, the Christian missionaries who came to the United States before it was the United States. We look at the Jesuits who were here very early, actually, in Canada. We're talking 1500s. So that notion of eradication of native language and culture and proselytization of Christianity has been in place very early on. And when the United States, the federal government looked to how to address, quote unquote, the Indian problem, they looked to Christian missionaries. Those people were considered to be the experts. So yes, they have had a long-standing influence on federal Indian policy and have had a long-standing continuous access to federal funding in various streams. Some of those are actually through tribal trust and treaty funds. So they have a very long relationship with Indian country. As the great Jesuit scholar Paul Prucha said, it is such that now today one can hardly think of Native people without considering the Catholic Church. So I think that, the mention in the recent boarding school report from the Department of the Interior, noting that at least half of the boarding schools were run by denominations, Christian denominations. That's the first time. I've been, writing about that for some time, but that's the first time we've ever seen anything in an official federal report regarding that.
We only have about a minute left, but I do want to ask, one of the ways you get to healing is by having the accurate facts. How close are we to that, and what are the chances of that ever happening?
I don't know. There's been some reluctance by the Catholics to, expose things that may shed a negative light on them, although they have employed some archivists, and they are looking to, quote unquote, organize their holdings before they release them to the public. So they do have a history of obfuscating, but let's hope that it's a move forward. I think anything that they do is, towards transparency is positive.
Mary Annette Pember, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.